On Thursday, July 23, 2026, in the Interior Ministry building in Niamey, Niger's Minister of State for the Interior, General Mohamed Toumba, received a visitor. The visitor was Liu Guijun, the ambassador of the People's Republic of China. They talked about security, about fighting terrorism and cross-border crime together. And the ambassador invited Niger to a public security forum
Interior
that China
Ministry
is hosting in
building in
Beijing in September. Mohamed Toumba.
China tries to play Big Brother in Niger. Beijing plans to mediate an African nation's crisis. China's mediation pitch as anti-French sentiment grows. China is trying to boost its influence in Africa by leveraging the Niger crisis.
Now, I am going to be completely straight with you, because that is what this channel does, and it is why you are here. Nothing was signed in that room. No Chinese soldiers are coming to Niger. No weapons deal was announced. No base. No treaty. It was a meeting, a courtesy call, warm words, and an invitation. So why is this channel making a video about a meeting? Because of where that meeting sits in a much bigger story. On its own, it is a diplomatic handshake. Placed in sequence with everything Niger has done over the last 3 years, it is a signal. And the signal is one of the clearest statements of a new African strategy anywhere on the continent. Let me show you the sequence. Then you will see why one handshake matters. Start in July 2023. Niger's military removes the elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, and takes power. At that moment, Niger is the West's single most important security partner in the Sahel. It is, in the words of Western officials at the time, the linchpin. The last reliable one standing after Mali and Burkina Faso had already turned. Then, one by one, Niger closes the doors. Door number 1, France. Within months of the coup, Niger orders the former colonial power to remove its troops. By the end of 2023, the last French soldiers leave. A decade of French military operations across the Sahel finished. And France did not just lose a base. It lost the country that had become the anchor of its entire Sahel policy, the place it relocated to after being pushed out of Mali. The fallback fell too. For a power that treated this region as its backyard for over a century, this was the moment the backyard was formally closed.
I salute you, Africa. Ibrahim Traoré has cut diplomatic ties with France. He has shown Emmanuel Macron the red card. Burkina Faso has told France that we do not want to work with you anymore. We don't want to work with you anymore. They have done the ultimate thing that you can do in the diplomatic circles.
Door number 2, the United States. And this one was the shock, because Niger did not treat America the way it treated France. At first, the junta signaled openness to keeping the defense relationship with Washington. Then Washington kept publicly demanding a return to civilian rule and the release of Bazoum. And in March 2024, Niger denounced the military cooperation agreement with the United States, calling it something that had been unilaterally imposed on them. That agreement covered a base America had spent about $110 million to build, Air Base 201 at Agadez, one of the most important drone bases on the continent, the eye in the sky for the entire American counterterrorism mission across West Africa. By August 5, 2024, the last American troops left Agadez, a $110 million base handed back empty.
Shifting focus to Niger, the United States has pulled out its remaining troops from the West African nation. The U.S. handed over its last military base, the Air Base 201, to the authorities in Niger. The large base, located in the city of Agadez in northern Niger, was a crucial hub for American counterterrorism operations in the country.
That base was not a minor outpost. When it was built, it was described as the largest U.S. Air Force construction project of its kind in history. Its drones watched the whole Sahel. tracking Al-Qaeda and Islamic State cells across a region the size of Western Europe. America did not want to leave it. Washington spent months trying to negotiate a way to stay, offering to keep the counterterrorism relationship going. Niger said no, and meant it. When the most powerful military on earth spends $110 million on a base and then walks away because a country of 25 million told it to, something real has shifted in who holds power in that relationship. Think about the scale of that. A poor, landlocked, embattled country told the most powerful military on earth to leave one of its most valuable forward bases. And America packed up and went. So Niger had closed the door on France and on America. Now, a country fighting a jihadist insurgency across huge stretches of its territory cannot simply have no security partners at all. So who walked in as the Westerners walked out? Door number 3, opening inward this time, Russia. In April 2024, the first Russian military advisors arrived in Niamey. Around 100 of them at first, with air defense systems. Russia's Africa Corps, the state-run successor to the Wagner Group.
On the tarmac of Niamey Airport, a Russian jumbo jet carrying military equipment. On board, military instructors from the Russian Ministry of Defense, who make no secret of their mission here.
We're here to train the Nigerian army using the military equipment that has arrived here. We're here to develop military cooperation between Russia and Niger.
A strengthening of cooperation made possible by an agreement between the junta and Moscow.
And in a detail that tells you everything about the symbolism, the Russians arrived at an airbase near Niamey Airport that still housed American troops. For a short period, Russian and American forces were on the same base, one moving in while the other moved out. That image, Russia arriving in the same compound America was leaving, became the picture of the entire shift in the Sahel. Let's pause for a second to say a big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Now bring it back to this week. To that handshake in the Interior Ministry. France, gone. America, gone. Russia, in. And now Niger sits down with China to talk about security. Do you see it now? This is not a country that swapped one master for another. This is a country deliberately widening the number of partners it can call, so that it is never again dependent on any single one of them. Because here is the lesson Niger learned the hard way. When France was your only serious security partner, France could shape your politics. When you depended on America's drones, America could lecture you about your government and hold your security hostage to its conditions. Dependence on one power is leverage for that power. The answer the AES has arrived at is diversification. Russia for boots and air defense, Turkey for drones, the Bayraktars that Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have all acquired, and now China, potentially, for a third channel of security cooperation on top of the economic relationship that already runs deep. No single one of them owns Niger. That is the entire point. And look at how deliberately the roles are split. You do not buy your drones from the same country that supplies your ground advisors. You do not run your oil sector with the same partner that trains your police. You spread it. Turkey for the Bayraktar drones, Russia for the advisors and the air defense, China for the oil, the infrastructure, and now perhaps a slice of security. Iran has reportedly been in conversations across the region about drones and uranium. Each partner gets a piece. None of them gets the whole thing. And because none of them holds all the leverage, none of them can dictate terms the way France once did when it was the only game in town. That is not naive. It is a genuinely sophisticated way for a small, poor country to survive in a world of great powers. Play them, so none of them can play you. And it is, whether or not anyone in Niamey says the name out loud, the strategy Thomas Sankara pointed at decades ago. Refuse to let any outside power become the one hand that feeds you, because whoever feeds you controls you. Niger is not choosing China over Russia or Russia over the West. It is refusing to let any of them be the only option. Here is a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Now the honest section. And this one has more than one hard edge. First, the caution I opened with, restated plainly because it matters. This was a meeting, not a pact. Anyone selling you Niger just signed a security deal with China is running ahead of the facts. What Niger did was open a door. Whether anything walks through it is a story for the months ahead, not today. Second, and this is the irony at the center of this whole thing, China is not a new or neutral partner for Niger. China is already deeply embedded in the Nigerian economy, and that relationship has been tense. China's national oil company runs the Agadem oil field in eastern Niger. China built the pipeline that carries Nigerian crude south through Benin to the sea for export. That is a massive Chinese stake in the country already.
With insecurity and a diplomatic dispute with neighboring Benin affecting the export of oil, Niger is looking at options. Military authorities are considering routing the oil through neighboring Chad and then to Cameroon. This Sahel analyst says that would need China to commit to investing. The Chad option is not an easy one either.
And Niger's own government has publicly complained about that relationship, about the wage gap between Chinese expatriate workers and Nigerian local workers, about the treatment of Nigerian staff in Chinese-run operations, about how little skill and technology actually transfers to Nigerians, about whether Niger is really getting a fair share of the value of its own oil. So the country now discussing deeper security ties with China is the same country that has been fighting with China over labor and money in its oil sector. That should tell you something important, and it cuts against a lazy reading of this channel's own perspective. Swapping a Western partner for a non-Western one does not automatically deliver fairness. China is not offering charity. China is protecting its investments and expanding its influence, exactly as any great power does. A Chinese security presence in Niger would, among other things, help protect Chinese oil infrastructure in Niger. Every one of these powers, France, America, Russia, China, comes with its own interest. The Nigerian government's job is to play them against each other well enough to come out ahead. Sometimes that works. Sometimes the smaller country ends up serving several masters instead of one. Third, has any of this actually made Niger safer? That is the question that matters more than which flag is on the advisors' uniforms. And the honest answer so far is no. In June 2026, fighters attacked Niamey's own airport. The insurgency has spread, not shrunk, since the Western forces left. Russia has been in the region for 2 years, and the violence has intensified. There is no evidence yet that Chinese involvement, if it grows, would change that either. Remember what happened to Russia in Mali in the spring of 2026. 3 northern strongholds abandoned in a matter of days as the fighters advanced. Russia is the partner that was supposed to succeed where the West failed. The security promise that justified every one of these expulsions has not, so far, been kept by anyone. That is the uncomfortable core of it. You can change every foreign flag on every uniform in the country, and the war in the countryside does not read the news. It continues. Rearranging your foreign partners is not the same as winning your war. It may be necessary. It is plainly not sufficient. So let me land this fairly, holding both halves the way we always do. What Niger is doing has a genuine logic, and it is a logic this channel respects. A country that was once the West's linchpin decided it would rather be nobody's linchpin. It closed the doors it had been told to keep open, and it went looking for a wider set of partners on terms it sets itself. That is a real assertion of sovereignty. And after 65 years of France treating Niger as a resource with a flag, the instinct behind it is completely understandable. But sovereignty measured only by the diversity of your partners is a thin kind of sovereignty. The deeper test is not how many capitals you can call. It is whether your own people are safer, richer, and more in control of their own resources than they were before. On that test, the uranium still leaves. The oil is still run by a foreign company Niger argues with. And the war is still being lost in the countryside. Adding China to the list of partners does not answer any of that. It just means that when Niger looks for help, there is one more door to knock on. Whether what comes through that door serves Niger or serves Beijing is the only question that will actually matter, and it is not answered by a handshake in July. Let us know in the comments section what you think. Is Niger playing a smart game, refusing to depend on any single foreign power, or is it just collecting new masters to replace the old ones? And can any amount of foreign security partnership win this war? Or does the answer have to come from the Sahel itself? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
The China in Africa podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Africa-China Reporting Project at Wits University in Johannesburg. The ACRP promotes balanced, considered reporting on China-Africa relations through training programs held throughout the year. More information at africachinareporting.com.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the China in Africa podcast, a proud member of the Sinica Podcast Network. I'm Eric Olander, and today I'm joined by China Global South's Francophone Africa editor, Jérôme, joining us on the line from beautiful Mauritius. A very good afternoon to you, Jérôme.
Good afternoon, Eric.
Jérôme, all week this week, and even into last week, I've been getting a lot of email from our readers saying, why aren't we doing more on the coup in Niger? You've been hearing this as well. People are frustrated that there's a lot of discussion going on about the impact for France and Russia and even the United States is this, and that at the same time, there's not a lot of discussion going on about China. And so people are saying, why aren't we having more coverage? And the problem for us is that there just isn't a lot to cover when it comes to the Chinese response here, because the Chinese have been characteristically tight-lipped about everything that's been going on. So today, we're going to have a discussion to try and elaborate on the politics, the strategy, and what's going on with the Chinese in Niger. Now, for those of you who have not been following this issue very closely, just to bring you up to speed, soldiers from the country's presidential guard last month on July 26th seized power and detained President Mohamed Bazoum. They are in control of the country as of this broadcast here this week. And again, there is a lot of talk about ECOWAS, which is the West African regional group, making an intervention, militarily intervene to put Bazoum back into power. There's a lot of condemnation from around the world. China, for its part, has been relatively quiet. But let me give you a little bit of background on China's role in Niger, just as a setup for our conversation today, Giraud. China is the country's second largest investor behind France, mostly in the oil and the uranium mining sectors. The best estimates that we have right now are that China's total FDI is somewhere around $2.5 billion to $3 billion. Now, some of those investments include an oil refinery joint venture between PetroChina and the government in the southern city of Zinder. That outputs around 20,000 barrels a day, largely for the domestic market. Now, the Chinese are also looking at exporting oil for the international market, and that has to do with a PetroChina joint venture on the 2,000-kilometer Niger to Benin pipeline. Now, this is an absolutely critical investment and something to watch that could have an impact by the coup. So as of February, this is the last update that we received on this, the pipeline was about 2/3 done, and they said that they expected it to be complete by the end of the year. And this is a potential game changer for the Nigerian government to be able to export vast quantities of oil through this pipeline via Benin. Total investment in the project, when the second phase begins, could reach as high as $4 billion, just to give you a sense of what's at stake there. Now, in the uranium sector, the China National Nuclear Corporation entered into a joint venture with the government to develop the Azalik mine in central Niger. Even though Niger has some of the world's highest grade uranium and about 5% of the world's total reserves, the Chinese halted their JV with the government back in 2015, and I couldn't find any information to see if it's up and running again. I'd be interested, Giraud, to see if you've heard anything on that. But those are the two main areas where the Chinese are invested today. And again, these are very important deals, and the coup at the same time, particularly for the oil pipeline, could have a very big impact. Now, let's talk about the diplomatic response to the coup. The Chinese Foreign Ministry issued its first statement on the issue on August 3rd, where it was a very bland statement, exactly what you would expect from the Chinese in a situation like this, where they called on Chinese nationals to shelter in place and said it was closely monitoring the safety of both Chinese personnel and institutions in the country. This is exactly the same language that we heard following the coup in Burkina Faso and in other disturbances elsewhere in Africa. Again, right now, they've been par for the course. That same day, also on August 3rd, they published a separate statement expressing support for President Bazoum and said that he's a friend of China and they hope his personal safety is ensured. They also added, and let me quote here, "We believe Niger and other countries in the region have the wisdom and capability to find a political solution to the current situation." Again, all of that is standard language for the Chinese. African solutions for African problems, that's a long-standing mantra that the Chinese have. And also the Chinese tend to prefer the powers that are in power. So their support for President Bazoum was, again, something very predictable. The last thing that we heard from the Chinese on this issue, again, this is the last statement, nothing else has been said about it, came earlier this week when the embassy in Niamey said it was time for Chinese nationals who could leave the country to do so. It was time to get out. So far, though, as of where we are now, there is no discussion of any kind of rescue operation like what we saw earlier this year in Sudan, and we haven't heard anything about Chinese forces in Djibouti or elsewhere being put on standby. So no rescue operation right now has been mobilized for Chinese nationals in Niamey or elsewhere in Niger. But the embassy has said, you know what, if you can get out, get out. Now, Giraud, you and I were talking earlier about the differences in the response that the Chinese government had to the coup in Niger and to what happened last year when the Ghanaian government was also overthrown by the military government. As I've noted, China is usually pretty quiet on these kinds of things, as they've been with Niger. That is, again, right out of their playbook, because if they comment a lot on the situation, then a lot of people could construe it as a potential violation of their longstanding non-interference doctrine, like they're meddling in another country's internal affairs. But they didn't do that in Guinea, and it caught a lot of us by surprise when the foreign ministry openly called for the return of deposed President Alpha Condé.
我们密切关注几内亚形势发展，注意到非盟。
We're closely following the situation in Guinea. China opposes the coup and calls for the immediate release of President Alpha Condé. We call on and hope all parties can remain calm, bear in mind the fundamental interests of Guinea and its people, resolve relevant issues through dialogue and consultation, and safeguard domestic peace and stability.
So did you hear what he said, where he said, we oppose the coup? That was interesting. Again, we haven't heard that before, and we're not hearing that in the Niger case. But Giraud, let's start there. Why do you think that the Chinese response to the recent coup in Niger was different than what we heard from Wang Wenbing about Guinea?
It's pretty much quite straightforward because you said it earlier. The coup in Niger, the reaction is really straight from China playbook when it comes to reacting on every coup happening or any political turmoil happening in any other countries. They stand by the principle of non-interference. We do hope that the involved party will gonna find a way to solve the issue peacefully, but we won't, take position on that. But in Guinea, they went a bit further than that. They went on opposing clearly the situation, just because in Guinea they had a lot in stake. They had the bauxite and iron project that's still the Simandou project that's on the pipeline, a very major project for China on a geopolitical scale, because those two projects, the bauxite and the iron project in Simandou, it represents an alternative to China to free itself from Australia iron and from Indonesia and Brazil bauxite, giving them a much more leverage in the relationship with Australia. Especially at that time, you remember it was September 2022, and the relations were really bad with Australia. So you could kind of understand, you could even feel the anxiety that China had because they didn't know what was going to happen and how it's going to unfold later on. And later on, when we saw the new regime in Guinea, how they behaved, you kind of feel that China had kind of a certain reason to be kind of worried about how things unfolded. So yeah, it's more about the geopolitics that's on the map and what really China has to gain or to risk in the situation. In the case of Niger, we don't see really much of like a situation where China is going to feel the need to go out of his way to oppose the coup, as we saw that in Guinea.
So in your thinking here, just let me see if I understand here, it's the fact that the resources in Niger and Guinea are different that guided or informed the response. And because oil is not really an important commodity for the Chinese when it comes to Africa, because a bulk of oil buying now for the Chinese has shifted now to the Middle East, Russia, Brazil, and even to some extent the United States. Africa now provides less than 10% of China's imported oil. Again, uranium, they had that deal. It's been stalled for almost 10 years. But again, uranium can be something that's sourced from a number of different places, so they don't really need Niger. So in that case, they said, okay, whatever. However, Guinea has the iron ore and the bauxite that they hate the fact that they're dependent on Australia for. And even though today relations between Australia and China appear to be improving, and again, I say appear because this is happening on multiple tracks where on the one hand, the Chinese have just taken down the tariffs on barley, but on the other hand, there is growing tension about Australia's involvement in U.S.-led military initiatives in the Indo-Pacific. So again, this is happening on two different tracks, and we may see a resumption of some of the tensions that we saw last year. But for now, things are getting better. But in your view, Giraud, so it's that question of the resources that guides the responses.
Exactly. It's more a question of the resources and how important is Niger to China. In the current context, China has no incentive to go out of its way to be more vocal about what's happening in Niger. Because also keep in mind that even though they said in the statement that President Bazoum was China's friend and they had contact, and also to address the question that you raised before to kind of know where they were standing on the uranium discussion, the last time they had discussion about uranium was June 27 this year, when a delegation of China, the China nuclear company, were in Niger to talk about that, to see how they're going to resume that project. So yeah, they had contact with Niger, but it was not to the extent to feel the need to go really to push further in a way that to oppose the coup. And let's keep in mind that for China, keeping that neutral position, especially since the new regime doesn't sound to be anti-China, gives them options. If Bazoum is out for good, they're still going to be able to continue to do business with the new regime. But if Bazoum is back, they're still also going to continue to do business with Bazoum. So for them, it's like, let's just keep our options open without, antagonizing any of the party involved.
And that's a really important point, because in all of the coups in the Sahel and in West Africa, and even in Sudan as well, the Chinese have been a neutral entity here. So none of the military coup plotters and the people who've taken over power have had a gripe with the Chinese. They haven't come out openly opposed about the Chinese in any way. In fact, it sounds like as soon as they came into power, they wanted to do business with the Chinese. Whereas you see open opposition to the French and even to some extent the Americans.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so in some sense, there's a geopolitical player. And again, when we were looking at Guinea, for example, we're wondering, okay, what's going to happen to their investments? And it turned out that the Chinese were in negotiations with the military government within days of them assuming power. And at the end of the day, this reaffirms that Chinese foreign policy in these kinds of situations is ultimately pragmatic and not ideological in any way.
Exactly. It's very pragmatic, opportunistic, I would even say, because it's more of like, we don't want to antagonize anybody. We need to be pragmatic in the way things are approaching. That's why they use the phrase by saying that we count on the wisdom of the party involved in the country and in the region to find a peaceful way out of this crisis. It's just to tell you that, we do hope that you do find a solution. And the idea, and even now, since we're talking about the idea of having a military intervention from ECOWAS, that's kind of put China in a certain position where they say, maybe we should tell our people, our citizens present in Niger, if they can leave the country, maybe they can leave the country. But still, even there, you don't feel the sense of urgency that we saw that when it happened in Sudan, for instance. It's more of like they kind of evaluate the situation on the basis that it's still manageable. The crisis didn't get the point where they really feel the need to evacuate the citizen on the ground.
It's still not clear if ECOWAS is going to have the capabilities to launch a multinational intervention in Niger to remedy the situation. And that does present China with an interesting conflict here, because on the one hand, though, they've said African solutions for African problems, right? I mean, that's been one of their long-standing things. However, it should be noted that the Chinese have a long-standing resistance and they just hold their noses at multinational interventions in other countries. It's something they detest, and they hate it when the Americans do it, and they hate it when it's done elsewhere, because there is this long
France set to end its military cooperation with Niger. French President Emmanuel Macron says he's pulling 1,500 troops out of the African country by the end of the year. France earlier stationed troops in Niger to assist with counterterrorism missions. But Macron says his country will not be held hostage by Niger. Military authorities insisting ousted President Mohamed Bazoum remains as the country's legitimate leader. Bazoum was toppled in a coup back in July. Overseas, the U.S. government is less than a week away from a possible shutdown if House Republicans fail to reach a compromise on spending bills that divide the party. More in this report.
In less than 1 week, the U.S. government will shut down if Congress can't come to agreements on spending bills that have so far exposed divisions within the Republican Party. A group of ultra-right-wing conservatives has threatened mutiny against and the ouster of House Speaker Kevin McCarthy following a spending compromise between him and President Joe Biden earlier this year to avoid defaulting on the nation's debt.
This is because Republicans on the Hill can't even agree among themselves. And remember, Kevin McCarthy and Speaker McCarthy and President Biden made a deal. And that deal was tough for all sides. Frankly, it was tough for our department. It meant cutting back on some things we wanted to do, some funds we were going to use to improve roads and bridges and airports. But we accepted that because that was the deal that was made earlier this year. And now all we're doing is asking them to live up to that deal.
That same group of Republicans who are members of the controlling party in the House of Representatives wants deep cuts to domestic spending as well as to U.S. support for Ukraine in its ongoing war against invading Russia. President Biden last week welcomed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to the White House after the two spoke at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Biden pledged continued and unwavering support to Ukraine.
The people of Ukraine are steeled for this struggle ahead. And the United States is going to continue to stand with you.
McCarthy left $300 million of funding for Ukraine in an embattled defense spending bill before the House of Representatives. It's something unlikely to endear his far-right flank.
I'll bet on Kevin McCarthy any day, and we certainly have time yet to go. But he's in a very difficult position because the holdouts keep saying to Kevin McCarthy, don't bring bipartisan bills to the floor. We don't want you to use Democrat votes to try to avert a shutdown. But they're using Democrat votes to try to cause a shutdown. And these individuals, these Republican holdouts, are voting with Nancy Pelosi against Republican bills that have been brought to the floor.
McCarthy's party holds a slim majority in the House. Even as few as 5 Republican defectors are enough to derail any legislation the majority attempts to pass. Lawmakers who spent the weekend away from Washington returned Tuesday to try again to avert a government shutdown, which will happen at 12:01 a.m. October 1st if lawmakers fail to agree on even a short-term funding bill. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
Let's find out what stories our North America Bureau is pursuing right now from our Bureau Chief, DJ Manoto.
Good morning, Nikki. Here are the top stories making the headlines amongst the Filipinos in this region. Let's begin in Maui, where disaster area restrictions are scheduled to be lifted for some areas devastated by the August 8 deadly wildfire. The first zone of the impacted areas by the Lahaina wildfire is finally opening up for residents to visit their properties for closure and property surveys. The Maui disaster area restrictions will be lifted for Zone 1C beginning September 25 and will be open for a limited time Monday to Tuesday.
We mainly just want to go back and get some closure, see our house again, and just hopefully could rebuild from there.
Nonprofit groups and community leaders are assisting survivors with what they need and are connecting them to different resources and interpreters.
A lot of them didn't know where to go look for resources. You know, they're not plugged into social media because there's only certain ones advertising. Limited English is an issue because applying for some of these funds, I know they have been simplified, but it's still, an issue for those that English is a second language.
Per the last census, almost half of Lahaina's residents are of Filipino descent, with many of them living there for generations, descended from the plantation era and waves of immigration. The Lahaina blaze killed at least 97 people, making it one of the nation's deadliest disasters. We head to Los Angeles, where a Philippine official tasked with the welfare of overseas Filipino workers met with members of the community.
87.
Eduardo de Vega, the Undersecretary for Migrant Workers Affairs of the Philippine Department of Foreign Affairs, met with Philam community groups to give updates on the assistance to nationals cases that looks to aid distressed Philippine nationals. Members of the Roque family, victims of an Asian hate crime, are among those who want to know how they can be assisted by the Philippine government. For his part, De Vega says 36 of the 94 Foreign Service posts have a Migrant Workers Office, or MWO. This includes the Los Angeles Consulate. Assistance available to overseas Filipino workers includes financial, legal, travel, and repatriation of remains, though reviewed on a case-to-case basis.
Approach the MWO and then they'll consult each other about what assistance, financial assistance will be given. Because it's distressed. It's not just like, I need money, give me money. No, but like when you're attacked, you're distressed. Now, I'm the Undersecretary. As long as I'm the Undersecretary, I'll be lenient in granting aid. But it can't be abused because we have a lot of kababayans also who really need badly in the Middle East.
And finally, in entertainment news, film actor Kiran Tamundong of the hit crime thriller Dahmer talks about what it's like to bag his first acting nomination. 21-year-old talent Kiran Tamundong shares how he got the role for Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
Sometimes the best auditions that I've had have been where I haven't pushed so hard to the limit, where I've actually reeled it back and tried to keep it more truthful to what I feel and whatever my character or whoever I'm portraying feels. And that actually really shone through.
This past July, his performance in the hit crime thriller earned him a Best Supporting Actor in a Limited Series nomination from the HCA TV Awards. He describes his reaction upon getting the good news from his manager.
I'm just starstruck by this. And she's naming off other nominees. I'm like, oh my goodness. These are the top dogs that I'm literally inspired by. People that I've been watching for years. I'm at a loss for words. I'm so excited for this.
And those are the stories making the headlines amongst the Filipino community in North America. You can catch more of our news on our website, news.abs-cbn.com/TFC News, on the ABS-CBN News YouTube channel, and on the ABS-CBN News app on your smartphones and tablets. Back to Nikki for the rundown.
We begin with simmering maritime tensions between the Philippines and China still. Manila condemning Beijing's installation of floating barriers in a part of the Scarborough Shoal that prevents Filipino fishermen from entering the area. The 300-meter-long barrier was discovered by the Philippine Coast Guard during a routine patrol last Friday. China also issued radio challenges and conducted dangerous maneuvers against Philippine vessels during the patrol.
According to the Filipino fishermen, every time na merong mga nakikita ng China Coast Guard na maraming Filipino fishermen na nangingisda sa immediate surroundings ng Baho de Masinloc, saka sila naglalatag ng barrier na to. It is a navigational hazard in a way na hindi ka naman talaga, speaking of buoys, buoys are basically used as an aid to navigation to support the mariners na i-identify yung mga dangerous area. Pero itong pagkakataon na to, they are using floating barrier para pagbawalan ang mga Filipino fishermen na makapasok sa loob ng shoal.
China claims 90% of the South China Sea, overlapping with the exclusive economic zones of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia. Manila's 2016 arbitral victory already invalidated China's sweeping claims, but Beijing refuses to recognize that position.
The People's Republic of China is deliberately ignoring the decision of the arbitral award and also deliberately not adhering to the international law. The mere fact that they are still claiming as if Baho de Masinloc Lagoon belongs to them, kaya sila naglalagay ng floating barrier dito, is illegal and an illegitimate action coming from the People's Republic of China.
Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri urging the Philippine Coast Guard to cut China's floating barriers in Scarborough Shoal. Zubiri says all illegal structures in the West Philippine Sea should be removed, not just to assert the country's sovereign rights, but also to protect Filipino fishermen in the area. He points out China has no right to put any structures within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. For Minority Senator Risa Ontiveros, the move shows China's cruelty knows no bounds. She says the Philippines should not let such acts go unpunished and should not allow China's bullying to continue. The Philippines calls for diplomacy in solving international conflicts during the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Manila's top diplomat, Enrique Manalo, delivered his speech over the weekend, where he urged countries to settle disputes through peaceful means. He also reiterated the foreign policy of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. that the Philippines remains a friend to all and an enemy to none.
We advocate the peaceful settlement of disputes in accordance with international law. This has always been our position with respect to the disputes in the West Philippine Sea. Inasmuch as we are prepared to defend our sovereignty, sovereign rights, and territorial integrity. As an archipelagic state whose destiny is intimately linked with the oceans, the Philippines is a champion of the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And we are proud to be among the first states to have signed this week the Treaty on Marine Biodiversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction, which opens new windows to cooperate in the responsible stewardship of the high seas.
The Philippines, Japan, and the U.S. agreed to strengthen security cooperation amid rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific region. 3 countries held a trilateral meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly Saturday, where they discussed possible activities to boost cooperation, including the creation of a work plan. They also agreed to call out those who violate international law. The 3 countries also discussed ways to support economic resiliency and enhance trilateral partnership in several areas, including digital economy. China reveals more details on its reported rescue of 2 Filipino fishermen off Spratly Islands. The Chinese embassy says it was moved by China's actions, which highlights the importance of humanitarian efforts and cooperation between the nations. It adds the rescue signifies the interconnectedness of Manila and Beijing. Last week, a Chinese local media reported 2 Filipino fishermen sought help from the People's Liberation Army vessel after one of them suffered wounds. The crew are said to have treated the fisherman's injury and provided food and medical supplies for the 2. The Philippine Coast Guard says it has no concrete information regarding that incident. Now, the rescue comes amid China's concerning actions in the West Philippine Sea. On Friday, another Filipino fisherman was chased by speedboats after it sailed near the Scarborough Shoal.